Hey Marantz fans, I get asked all the time how to remove a warped, melted, or crumbling lamp housing from a Marantz receiver like this 2325 here and replace it with one of the housings that I sell. And it's past time that I make a video outlining the process. So pretty straightforward, be accomplished with basic hand tools for the most part, screwdrivers, pry tool, 8mm nut driver for these little bolts on the front faceplate that does need to be removed. So I'll walk you through the process. There's one of the replacement housings that I'll be putting in this 2325. This is my own personal 2325. I bought it about 10 years ago in recently restored condition, but I've never been inside it. I took a quick look through the vents. Looks like the housing that's in there is original in fair but not great condition, so probably needs to be replaced. We'll do an LED conversion on it while I'm at it. So first thing you need to do is remove the top cover. I'm sure it goes without saying, but they're dealing with mains voltage, so make sure that the receiver is unplugged and has been for several hours to allow the capacitors inside to discharge. He's just using a number 1 Phillips here on top. 2325, there are 2 screws fore and aft. And then 2 larger screws on either side. 2 Phillips works over there a little better. So I'm kind of reaching over this awkwardly so that you can see the faceplate more clearly. All right, that just slides up and off. Set that aside. And next, the faceplate needs to come off. All right, in order to remove the faceplate, first thing you want to do is remove the 4 8mm bolts on all 4 corners. Prevent the faceplate from getting scuffed up by the little bit driver here. I usually use this is just a little scrap piece of plastic, piece of cardboard, paper, you know, whatever. That will prevent the tool from leaving marks on the brushed aluminum faceplate. Next up, the potentiometer and selector switch knobs need to come off. Just use this little pry tool here. You know, in a pinch you can use a flat blade screwdriver as well, carefully. Use a little shop towel here against the faceplate where I'm prying, just again to prevent any scuff marks. I caution you against just pulling them off. Oftentimes this little plastic barrel that's just glued to the outer aluminum cap will separate. You can certainly glue them back together, but this way you don't have to. Keep track of their position as well. They're not all made identically, so if you want things to line up when you place them back on at the conclusion, you want them to go back where they came from. Next up, we need to remove the small potentiometer and fader knobs from the black portion of the faceplate. They don't all need to come off. Some of these are push buttons that have through-hole switches large enough that the faceplate can slide right over them. You'll be able to tell which ones do. Again, every receiver is a little bit different across the different models. All right, the last step to getting the faceplate off is the only part that's maybe a little bit fiddly. On this particular 2325, there's a little spindle jam nut right here. You can see it's got two slots, top and bottom. I have a spindle socket that'll get in there and do that, but that isn't exactly a common toolbox item. So I'll show you how to do it carefully with a flat blade screwdriver. On a lot of receivers I've worked on, this is also a 12 millimeter jam nut. Jam nut, very low profile, hard to get a socket on sometimes. Most sockets have kind of a rounded bevel on the end, so maybe your socket will work. You can certainly use a 12 millimeter wrench or an adjustable wrench, but again, just take caution not to scratch up the faceplate. So in case of this spindle nut, you can just slot that in there, and then very carefully I'm just pushing kind of down and rotating counterclockwise here. There we go. That's that. All right, that should be all. Oh, wide. One last little countersink screw up here on top. And another thing that I didn't mention right at the beginning, I have the receiver supported on a little, maybe half-inch thick piece of hardwood. Whatever you have laying around your bench that just gets the weight up off of the faceplate will certainly make removal easier and safer. Otherwise, once you've taken the feet off of the receiver, mine was in a wood case, it doesn't have the feet on it right now. It would have been resting on the bottom edge of the faceplate. So if you get your feet on there, no problem, but otherwise support it. All right, last thing we need to do on the front side of the receiver in order to reveal the two screws that secure the front of the lamp housing is remove this tuner and selector light window. It's plastic, but quite fragile. Likely in the case of your receiver, certainly in the case of this one, the adhesive that holds it in place has failed over time, and so it's just kind of sitting there. If yours is still adhered, you may need to, very, very gently pry it away. Sometimes I use a little utility knife or a putty knife. Again, very, very carefully. You don't want to scratch that. You don't want to pry on it. So to get that off, first we need to remove this little dust cover here over the tuning dial. And then move the tuning needle itself and just pull that up and set it there, at which point this is mostly free. The other thing you might want to do is just loosen these screws that secure the top of the meter housing. They extend down and may prevent this piece from sliding forward. I'm just rocking forward. Yeah, this is a great time to replace your vellum paper too while you're in there, which is probably yellow just like this one. And finally, we can remove the two screws that secure the front of the lamp housing in place here and here. The housing itself is sandwiched in between the steel of the frame and the bracket behind there. Delicately set that to the side or to the back there. you do it carefully enough, you can get away with not having to restring the tuner, which is always nice. And at that point, the housing is free. So I'll flip the camera around and we'll look from the other side. All right, now working from the other side of the receiver, the lamp carrier bracket is affixed to the housing via these two open-ended tabs or ears on either side. This one is broken, missing a screw. At some point, probably last time the lamps were replaced or the receiver was serviced, that had broken. They didn't bother putting the screw back in there, so I have to pull one out of my parts bin. And this one is there, although the tab is cracked. So remove that. And then once that's removed, there is a little piece of cardboard, paper, poster board, whatever you want to call it, right here that kind of acts as a light shield that's glued to the side of the housing. It may have already separated. It hasn't in the case of this receiver, and I don't know if you can see there, but it kind of comes down and bends at an angle. So I want to pull that away before you lift this up. This particular piece of paper is broken, so it's not going to be in the way here. But at that point, you can just kind of rotate that up, and then depending on the condition of your housing, it should just pull away. Now this one's pretty melted, so it's gonna take a little bit of doing to get it off of there. There we go, and then just let the lamp bracket, lamp carrier rest there. So I've seen worse, but it's not great. Ears are broken, lots of thermal damage, missing pieces. Pretty typical for the styrene compound that they used. All right, I've completed my LED conversion. I've got the new housing installed. One final consideration during reassembly. You may notice that you've got a bit of a gap here between the selector lamp bracket and the housing. Depending on the thickness of your original lamp housing. This is a real easy to adjust. Just loosen these two screws here, here, and then you can slide that forward, snug it up, tighten it back down, and good to go. And then last step, this bracket also supports the tuning dial line. Just sits over top here, and then secures on either corner with the two countersunk screws that you removed from the front in the previous step. And at that point, reassembly is simply the inverse of removal.